In the dead of winter, when even the wind seemed to forget mercy, a little girl sat alone on the icy sidewalk, her blue shirt soaked, her fingers clutched around a worn canvas bag. Behind her, a German shepherd stood fur dusted with snow, eyes locked on the silent road barking, not from fear, but from urgency. It wasn't noise, it was a call, a cry, a command to the world. See her, now. No one knew her name, no one knew where she came from, but that bark would change everything. Beneath a slate-gray sky churning with wind and snowfall, the small town of Fairpine, nestled near the edge of a frozen national park in Montana, braced itself against another bitter night. It was well past midnight, and the streets had long emptied, save for a few snowplows groaning in the distance. Along the quiet roadside near an old rest stop on the outskirts, a child sat slumped against a weather-stained concrete wall, barely visible beneath the sweeping veil of snow. Emily was 6 years old, though the layers of frost on her lashes and the weary droop of her shoulders made her seem older, worn by a burden too large for her frame. She was small and thin, with light brown hair tangled and crusted with ice, strands stuck to her cheeks like delicate twigs. Her clothing was too light for the deep freeze, a long-sleeved forest green cotton shirt now darkened with wetness, and a wool dress that clung stiff to her legs. Her shoes were mismatched and soaked through. Clutched tightly in her arms was a faded blue drawstring bag, threadbare at the edges, pressed to her chest like a lifeline. Her eyes were closed, her lips slightly parted, a thin line of steam curling from her breath, though faintly now. She looked not asleep, but surrendered, adrift in the hush of the storm. A sudden bark cracked through the silence. A large German shepherd stood several feet in front of her, pawing into the snow with urgency. The dog's coat was sable-deep black down the back, fading into rich browns at the flanks. His ears stood high, nose tilted to the wind, tail stiff behind him. He barked again, sharp and commanding, the sound echoing across the empty stretch of road like a cry for help. His name was Shadow. Shadow belonged to Isaac Monroe, a man of 71 who lived alone in a cabin just beyond the tree line near the rest stop. Isaac was a wiry man with weathered skin like sun-bleached bark, a grizzled beard kept short, and hands stiff from old carpentry work. He had retired years ago from a long life building porches and barns, but he still walked the trail between his cabin and the rest stop most nights. Sometimes to think, sometimes to leave out food for the stray cats that gathered behind the diner. That night, Isaac had been reading near the fire when Shadow began to grow restless, pacing the door, then barking once, low and persistent. It was not the bark of annoyance, but urgency. Isaac trusted Shadow more than most people. He bundled into his heavy canvas coat and followed the dog down the icy path. When he rounded the last drift and saw the figure huddled by the wall, the cold surged through his chest. He dropped to one knee beside the child without a word. She wasn't responsive, but she was breathing shallow, fast. Her skin was cold, and her hands trembled as he gently tried to unwrap the bag from her grip. Inside, he found 3 things: a tattered plaid scarf, a broken green crayon, and a wallet-sized photograph of a woman holding the same child under the dappled light of a large tree. Isaac didn't waste a second. He took off his coat and wrapped it around the girl, then called 911 from the old payphone near the diner. Shadow sat beside them the entire time, his body tense, his eyes locked on the road, as if watching for something or someone who might come back. When the paramedics arrived, the girl was still unconscious but alive. Isaac rode with them to the hospital, explaining only what he knew, that Shadow had found her, that she had no ID, and that there'd been no sign of any adult nearby. The sheriff's department was notified, and Deputy Rose Hall, a stern but kind woman nearing retirement, was called from her home to begin the case. No one knew who Emily was. She had no last name, no records, no matching missing persons report, at least not yet. As the snow thickened that night, wrapping Fairpine in silence, One thing remained certain. Without Shadow's bark and Isaac's quiet instinct to trust it, the child might have been lost to the storm forever. The hospital room was quiet, except for the steady rhythm of a heart monitor and the occasional whisper of wind against the frosted windowpane. Snow still fell softly outside, blanketing the town of Millfield in silence, while the pale morning sun tried to push through layers of gray. Inside, under sterile white sheets and the faint scent of antiseptic, Emily stirred. She was a small girl, only 6, but looked even younger in that moment, her face pale, her lips cracked, her lashes fluttering against her cheeks as she awoke. Her light brown hair, still messy and tangled from the night before, clung to her forehead in damp strands. The oversized hospital gown dwarfed her already thin frame. When her eyes opened fully, they were distant and unreadable, like the glassy surface of a frozen pond. At the foot of her bed lay the dog. He was large and alert, his black and tan coat matted with bits of melted snow and mud from the night's ordeal. He had refused to leave her side since being let into the ER. Now he rested with his chin on his paws, ears perked up the moment she moved. The nurses had taken to calling him Shadow, after the way he never strayed more than a few feet from Emily. No collar, no microchip. No one had come forward claiming him. It was as if he'd appeared from the storm, just to find her. Gwen, the nurse on duty, stepped in and immediately softened her voice. She was a plump woman in her 50s, with a dimpled face and silver curls pinned into a messy bun. Her warmth could disarm even the grumpiest patients. "Well, hey there, sweetheart," she whispered, crouching beside the bed. "Can you hear me?" Emily blinked slowly. When Gwen reached out to adjust the IV drip, the girl flinched, then clutched a small, faded blue canvas bag she'd been sleeping with, pressing it tight against her chest. "Easy now, honey. It's okay," Gwen murmured. "You're safe here." Not long after, Deputy Rose Hall entered the room. She was a tall, wiry woman in her early 60s, with sharp gray eyes and a slow, deliberate way of moving. Like someone who'd learned the value of patience through years of policing small towns. She wore a beige sheriff's coat over a checkered flannel shirt, and her badge hung heavy on her chest. Everyone in Millfield knew her, and they knew she didn't take nonsense, but those who were hurting saw another side, steady, thoughtful, and fiercely protective. She walked in with a quiet nod and sat in the chair next to Emily. The dog growled softly at first, but settled when she offered her hand to sniff. "So you're the one who brought her here, huh?" she said, half to the dog, half to the silent room. Emily didn't speak until Gwen gently asked her name again. This time the girl opened her mouth just enough to breathe. "Emily." No last name. No address. No explanation. Rose looked over to Gwen, who shook her head. "No signs of physical trauma. Just cold, hunger, and exhaustion. And, When Rose later examined the canvas bag carefully, and with permission, they found 3 simple items: a pink wool scarf, worn and unraveling at the ends, a broken green crayon dulled by use, and a small photograph, wrinkled and faded from being handled too much. In it, Emily stood hugging a woman with long, dark hair under a tree in full bloom. Both were smiling. It wasn't much, but it told a story of a girl who'd once felt safe. "She's not just a runaway," Rose muttered. "This kid's loved." That afternoon, Shadow was officially allowed to remain with her in the room. Hospital staff, though unsure what to do with him, admitted he calmed Emily more than any sedative could. He lay by her bed, watching everyone who entered, tense until proven trustworthy. Later that evening, as the snowstorm finally eased and the sky faded into dusk, Rose spoke with her colleagues at the station. They ran Emily's name, searched missing persons databases, and called child services. But there were no matches, no reports of a girl fitting her description. It was as if she'd fallen through the cracks of the world. So Rose did what she hadn't done in years. She offered to take the child home with her temporarily, citing special circumstances. The sheriff's house sat at the edge of town, modest and quiet, with a wood stove that groaned in the winter. She hadn't had a child in her care since her own daughter left for college nearly a decade ago. But something about the look in Emily's eyes, the way she clung to the bag, the way she leaned just slightly into the dog's body for warmth, made Rose's heart ache. "She needs time," Rose said to Gwen as she packed Emily's belongings into a paper bag. "And so do I." That night, as the girl slept curled next to Shadow on Rose's old couch, the fireplace crackling softly nearby, Rose sat at her kitchen table. In front of her lay the photograph. She turned it over, hoping for writing, a name, a date, anything. But there was nothing. Still, the woman's face was familiar. Not from town, not from any case files, but somewhere. Maybe someone passing through? She made a note to check gas stations, old motels, traffic cameras, anything that might place the woman near Millfield. As the snow drifted gently outside the window and the clock ticked on past midnight, Rose whispered to herself, "We'll find her. We'll figure this out." The snow had stopped falling by morning, but the air still hung heavy with a brittle silence that only winter could conjure. Deputy Rose Hall stood in the dim glow of her office at the Pine Grove Sheriff's Department, her fingers curled around a steaming mug of coffee that had long since gone lukewarm. Her graying auburn hair was tied back into a loose braid, and the deep lines etched into her face bore witness to decades of service, most of it quiet. Until now. She stared at the grainy footage from a highway surveillance camera, the screen flickering faintly. A timestamp blinked in the corner, 2:17 a.m., 2 nights ago. There, caught in the headlights of a passing semi-truck, a dented gray sedan pulled over near the old rest stop by the concrete wall. The camera captured 2 figures stepping out, one tall, one small. The woman leaned heavily against the car for a moment, visibly unsteady, before taking the little girl's hand. Then they disappeared out of frame. Rose paused the video and zoomed in as best she could. It was blurry, indistinct, but the posture of the woman bent slightly at the waist, one hand pressed to her head spoke volumes to Rose's trained eye. Something was wrong. Not just physically, but emotionally. There was a kind of desperation in the way she moved, like someone who had run out of options. She leaned back, exhaled slowly. "Not abandonment," she murmured to herself. "Something else." In the corner of her office, Shadow rested quietly, head on paws, but his ears perked slightly at her voice. The dog had barely left the station since that snowy night. Deputy Hall had half expected him to bolt once the girl was safe, but instead, he had stayed alert, watchful, loyal, in a way that stirred something in her chest she hadn't felt in years. Emily was still recovering, now staying with Rose in her cozy house just outside of town. The child remained mostly quiet, yet each day, she seemed more alert, more willing to interact. That morning, she'd asked for paper and a pen. Rose had given her a set of colored pencils that had belonged to her grandson. Now, Rose reached for her coat and headed home, footage saved onto a USB. She needed to see what the little girl might remember. Back at the house, Emily was sitting on a rug by the fireplace, her knees tucked to her chest. Shadow curled beside her like a living blanket. The room was warm and softly lit, filled with the faint scent of pine and old leather books. Emily's light brown hair had been gently brushed, though it still curled at the ends from sleep. Her cheeks were pale but healthier now, and her eyes large and slate gray followed Rose with quiet curiosity. On the floor lay 3 drawings. In the first, a gray car sat next to a long wall. In the second, a tall woman with messy hair and tired eyes held the hand of a smaller girl in a blue shirt. And in the third, a large black and tan dog stood between them. And something ominous, a vague scribble of shadowy shapes that looked like storm clouds or people. "That's you," Rose said gently, kneeling beside the girl and pointing to the dog. Emily nodded without speaking. She tapped the woman in the second drawing. "Mommy," she whispered. Rose glanced at the scribbled background and lowered her voice. "Were you scared?" Emily didn't answer. Instead, she pulled out a fourth piece of paper from the pocket of her hoodie. It was torn at the edge and drawn in shaky lines. A woman sat slumped against a wall. The little girl stood beside her, looking away. She said... Emily's voice trailed off. Her eyes were fixed on the picture. She said to wait. Said someone good would find me. Rose swallowed hard. It didn't sound like abandonment. It sounded like a last hope. That evening, Rose brought the footage and drawings to Sheriff Duncan Harris. He was a tall, stout man with a closely cropped beard and a reputation for being methodical. As he watched the video and examined the drawings, his expression shifted from disinterest to concern. "Whoever this mother is, she didn't leave that girl because she wanted to," he said. "This smells like desperation, not neglect." "Agreed," Rose said. "I've already put out a notice to shelters in the next 2 counties. If she survived the night, she may have shown up somewhere." Duncan glanced at Shadow, who had followed Rose into the office and now sat by the door, tail motionless. "He still won't leave her side?" Duncan asked. "No," Rose said. "It's like he thinks she's his job now." The sheriff raised an eyebrow. "Well, maybe we should listen to him." Meanwhile, in a motel 2 towns over, an elderly night clerk named Harold Jennings wiped down the front desk, while a social worker from the county health office checked her notes. She had just spoken to a woman with a head injury, brought in 3 days ago by a Good Samaritan who found her unconscious near the roadside. The woman remembered little, but she kept asking the same thing. "Did they find my daughter? Was she okay? Was she cold?" The social worker looked up Amanda Carter's name on the hospital registry and cross-referenced it with the county alerts. She paused, then called the number listed under the Pine Grove Sheriff's Department. Back at the house, Emily had finally drifted to sleep, her small body curled beneath a thick quilt. Shadow lay at her feet, head resting on his paws, eyes still half open in quiet vigilance. Rose stood in the doorway, a tired weight in her chest, but also a flicker of something else, a thread of truth beginning to unwind. That night, Rose wrote in her old leather journal for the first time in months. The entry was brief. "She isn't alone, and I don't think her mother meant to leave her. Something happened. Something in the middle of nowhere. I intend to find out what." The storm had settled into a steady rhythm by the time Emily was warm and safe again, nestled within the quiet walls of the Hall residence. Outside, the snow still blanketed every surface, smoothing over the sharp edges of the town as if trying to make the world gentler than it had been just a day ago. Inside, near the window, Emily sat curled in a fleece blanket, her tiny frame still trembling every so often, not from the cold now, but from memories that lingered like shadows behind her eyes. Deputy Rose Hall watched her from the doorway of the small living room, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Rose was a woman in her late 50s, with graying hair pulled into a tidy bun and a demeanor forged by decades of witnessing the fragile boundary between tragedy and survival. Her voice, usually commanding, had softened when she spoke to the child. Still, it hadn't been easy. Emily barely spoke at all. When she did, her words came in short, hesitant bursts, like someone fishing for pieces of a dream. That afternoon, something shifted. Rose had sat down with her again, this time not in a sterile hospital room, but in her own home, where the kettle hummed softly in the background and the air smelled faintly of cinnamon tea. Shadow lay at Emily's feet, head resting on his front paws, never more than a breath away. Emily's voice was so faint at first, Rose leaned in to catch it. "It was dark," she said, her fingers clutching the edge of the blanket. "The snow was really big that night. We left the house after the man said we couldn't stay. Mommy said the heater broke and we had to go." Rose didn't interrupt. She knew better than to ask too many questions when the truth was already trembling its way into the light. Emily looked down. "She drove the car. We didn't have a place to go. The hotels were all full. Mommy said someone told her about a place, a shelter for moms and kids, not far." A flicker of something hardened behind Rose's eyes. It made sense now, the odd route on the traffic camera, the unfamiliar license plate so far from where it had started. She reached for her notepad but didn't write yet. Emily continued, slower this time, like the words themselves were cold and heavy. "It was so snowy. I couldn't see anything out the window. Mommy held my hand while she drove." Her voice cracked. "But then the car went—" She made a twisting motion with her hands. "It hit something. It made a loud sound. Mommy's head hit the window. She stopped talking." Her hands trembled as she clutched the blanket tighter. "I tried shaking her," she whispered, eyes fixed on the memory. "I said, 'Mommy, wake up,' again and again. I shouted even though it hurt my throat. But she didn't move. I was so scared." Rose reached forward slowly, placing her hand gently on the girl's knee. She didn't speak. "I waited in the car," Emily said after a long silence. "I thought she'd wake up. But it got so cold. My toes hurt. The window got foggy. I got scared she wouldn't ever wake up." Outside the window, the snow began falling again, quieter now, soft as breath. "Then I saw something," Emily said. "Through the fog, a shape. Big. I thought it was a monster, but it was a dog." Shadow's ears perked slightly at her voice. "He came to the car. I opened the door, and he didn't bark at me. He just looked, like he knew I needed help." That was the first time Emily looked up at Rose directly. "He turned and walked into the snow, and I followed." The silence between them grew thick, full of things unsaid. Rose swallowed and finally reached for her notepad. "Did you know where he was taking you?" Emily shook her head. "I just knew he was trying to help," she said simply. Later that evening, while Emily rested, Rose stepped outside to call Isaac Monroe. The old man answered on the second ring. His voice was hoarse with age, but steady. "She's okay," Rose said. "She remembers a shelter her mother was looking for. And the crash. Sounds like it happened a few miles past the highway turnoff." Isaac exhaled through the line. "That dog of mine, Rose. He's never done anything like that before." Rose looked across the street, where Shadow now lay curled by Emily's side like a living guardian. "I don't think he was just following instinct," she said. "I think he knew exactly what he was doing." That night, Rose began the process of combing emergency logs from the surrounding counties, and there it was, tucked away in a report from a rural hospital. A woman brought in 2 nights prior, unconscious, suffering a head wound, no ID, no insurance, and no child accompanying her. Her name had been given once she regained consciousness: Amanda Carter. The report mentioned she was disoriented, asking about her daughter. No one had known what to make of her. They assumed she was confused, perhaps homeless, perhaps delirious from injury. But Rose knew better. Before morning, she would make the call. The cold wind swept over the parking lot of the Pinefield County Police Department, scattering brittle leaves across patches of salt-streaked pavement. Amanda Carter stood motionless at the entrance, one hand clutching the oversized coat she had borrowed from the hospital, the other buried deep in the pocket of her faded jeans. Her face, pale and marked by a dark bruise at her left temple, betrayed both exhaustion and fear. Her brown hair, matted and unwashed, clung to her face as she hesitated at the threshold, then pushed open the heavy door. Inside, the warmth did nothing to ease the weight in her chest. The desk sergeant, a heavy-set man in his early 50s with a white mustache and kind but tired eyes, looked up as she entered. He recognized the disorientation immediately. She didn't look dangerous. just lost. I need to speak with someone. Amanda's voice cracked. About a little girl. The sergeant nodded slowly. We've been expecting you. Minutes later, Amanda was led into a modest office at the back of the station. Deputy Rose Hall stood by the window, her coat still on, arms folded. The two women looked at each other in silence for a moment. Rose took in Amanda's slight frame, the hospital ID bracelet still around her wrist, the torn knee of her jeans, and the haunted look in her eyes. Amanda sat down without being asked. Her hands fumbled through a torn leather wallet, and from it she produced a crumpled photograph. She placed it on the desk with trembling fingers. "This is my daughter," she whispered. "Emily. She was with me before the crash." Rose picked up the photograph. It was creased and water-stained, but the image was still clear enough. Emily, younger, but unmistakable, her arms wrapped tightly around a smiling woman beneath a canopy of golden leaves. The same photo that had been found in the child's fabric bag. "I found her," Rose said quietly. "Or rather, a dog did, and an old man named Isaac Monroe." Amanda's shoulders slumped. The relief hit her like a wave, leaving her gasping. "She's alive?" Her voice broke. "You've seen her?" "She's safe," Rose said, stepping forward. "She's with me right now, staying at my house until we can get things sorted. We didn't know who she was. No papers, no name at first. Just the photo, a broken crayon, and an old scarf." Amanda nodded, the words too much and yet never enough. She wiped her eyes with her sleeve. "We didn't have anywhere to go. The motel kicked us out when the heater broke. I didn't have enough to pay for repairs. The snow was getting worse. I tried the shelters I knew, but they were full." She looked down at her hands. Her fingernails were chipped and dirty. The knuckles scraped raw. "Someone told me about a place further out, past the highway. Said they used to have a shelter for women and kids. I thought, maybe they'd help us." Rose leaned against the desk, listening with the stillness of someone who understood desperation far too well. "We left around midnight," Amanda continued. "I tried to stay awake. I kept holding Emily's hand. She was so quiet. I should have known something would go wrong. The car hit black ice. I tried to brake, but it was too late. We hit the side wall. I must have hit my head hard. I don't remember anything after that until I woke up in the hospital. They said someone found me passed out behind the wheel, bleeding. But Emily, she wasn't there." Her breath hitched. "I thought she'd died. I thought I'd killed her. Until the nurse turned on the TV in the waiting room. There was a news report. Some anonymous little girl found unconscious in the snow, wrapped in a dirty blue shirt, clutching a green bag, with a dog standing guard beside her." Amanda's voice cracked. "That was my girl. That was Emily. I recognized her shirt, the one with the faded star she insisted on wearing. She wore it for luck." Rose placed a steadying hand on Amanda's shoulder. "She's been waiting for you. Not with words, but in her drawings. She's been drawing you every day." Amanda closed her eyes, tears slipping free now. "I thought I lost her." "You didn't," Rose said firmly. "But we'll need to verify everything hospital reports, your ID, the details of the crash. It's procedure." Amanda nodded. "Of course. Whatever it takes." "And one more thing," Rose added. "The dog, Shadow. He's the reason your daughter is alive. He found her in the snow. He led her to the rest stop where Isaac heard him barking." Amanda looked up. "Shadow?" Rose nodded. "German Shepherd. Big, black and tan, gentle as they come. He belonged to Isaac, but the way he's taken to Emily, you'd think they've known each other their whole lives." Amanda swallowed hard. "I want to thank them. The dog. "The man, you, all of you. You'll get your chance," Rose said. "But first, let's get you home." That evening, Rose drove Amanda through the winding county roads back to Willow Run. The snow had begun to melt in patches, revealing the mud and gravel beneath. In the passenger seat, Amanda sat quietly, clutching the photograph like a lifeline. The bruises on her temple had darkened, and her lip was still swollen from where she'd bitten it during the crash, but none of that mattered now. When they pulled into Rose's driveway, Amanda's hands shook. The porch light cast a golden glow over the front step, and there, curled beside the door like a sentinel, was Shadow. He stood as they approached, tail swishing once, then paused, watching Amanda with solemn eyes. Amanda knelt slowly, extending her hand. "Thank you," she whispered, "for finding her, for bringing her back." Shadow stepped forward and pressed his head into her palm. Inside the house, Emily sat at the kitchen table, a crayon clutched in her small hand. She looked up as the door creaked open. For a moment, no one spoke. Then the crayon rolled to the floor. Amanda stepped forward, heart in her throat. "Mommy." Emily's voice was barely more than a breath. Amanda dropped to her knees. "I'm here, baby. I'm here." And then they were in each other's arms, the warmth of their reunion spilling into every corner of the quiet house. The storm had passed. What remained was a blanket of snow resting gently over the town of Willow Run, softening the edges of rooftops, fences, and memories. The sky, now a muted silver, glowed faintly with the late morning sun trying to break through. It was the kind of morning that asked for quiet. No shouting, no rushing, only the hush of breath in the cold, and the warmth of something slowly healing. Emily sat on the wooden steps of Isaac Monroe's porch, bundled in a thick knitted sweater that dwarfed her small frame. Her knees were pulled up under her chin, and in her lap she clutched a scrap of yellow paper where a stubby crayon dragged uncertain lines. The drawing showed 3 stick figures beneath a roof, one tall, one small, and one with pointy ears and a big tail. Beside her, Shadow lay in a half-doze, ears twitching at the sound of every shifting wind. His black and tan coat was dusted with snow, his body curled protectively toward her, as though he still wasn't quite ready to stop guarding her, even in peace. Isaac stood inside, watching through the frosted window with a cup of coffee in one hand. He wore the same heavy flannel shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing age-spotted arms that bore the wear of time and work. His frame, tall and stooped with the weight of years, moved slowly now. But in his eyes, blue and steady, was a light not dulled by age, something firm and kind. Down the narrow, snow-packed road, a car pulled into view. It was a dusty hospital transport vehicle, the kind lent to discharged patients in small towns where public transport was more myth than reality. The passenger door opened, and Amanda Carter stepped out into the bright cold. She was thinner than she had been in the photograph, her cheeks pale, and her eyes rimmed with exhaustion. A knitted beanie, too big for her head, covered her short brown hair. Her borrowed coat hung loose on her shoulders, sleeves pushed up unevenly to reveal hospital bracelets still clinging to her wrists. But none of that mattered now, because her eyes were locked on the little figure at the porch. Emily looked up. The crayon dropped from her fingers. She didn't cry. She didn't rush. Instead, she stood, brushed the snow from her knees, and walked slowly toward the steps. Reaching into her canvas bag, she pulled out something faded and red, her old scarf. Amanda stopped at the base of the steps, unsure, trembling. Emily climbed down, her boots crunching into the snow, and with careful hands wrapped the scarf around her mother's neck. "I knew you were looking for me," she said softly. Amanda fell to her knees in the snow, her arms wrapping around her daughter so tightly it seemed she feared the girl might disappear again. She buried her face in Emily's hair and wept. Not loudly, not uncontrollably, but the kind of crying that came from somewhere long buried, like a well suddenly full again. Shadow stood and padded forward, tail held low. Amanda looked up at him, eyes wide. "You must be the one," she whispered. "You found her." The dog leaned his weight against her gently, his head nudging her arm in quiet acknowledgement. She reached for him, hands shaking as they found the warmth of his fur. "Thank you," Amanda said, her voice cracking. "Thank you for staying with her." A creak came from the porch. Isaac had stepped out, holding a folded blanket. He walked slowly, his boots sinking into the snow. Amanda turned to him as he approached, still on her knees. "You're the man who heard him barking," she said. "You came." Isaac gave a short nod. "He made sure I did." Amanda stood, her arms still around Emily. "I don't know how to thank you." "No need," he said simply, handing her the blanket. "We just did what anyone would do, or what we should do." Emily looked up at Isaac, then to Shadow, and then at her mother. "He used to be yours?" she asked. Isaac crouched beside Shadow, his joints groaning in protest. "He was, for a while. Came to me on a stormy night some years ago. Stayed until something told him to move on." Amanda met his gaze. Would it be all right if we kept him? I don't want him to go again. Neither does she." Isaac looked at Shadow, whose eyes were calm, steady. "Well," he said, with a crooked smile, "I think he's already made his choice." Shadow gave a low, almost amused bark, then returned to Emily's side, pressing his shoulder gently against hers. Emily giggled and buried her hands in his fur. They didn't go inside right away. Amanda and Emily sat back down on the porch steps, shoulder to shoulder, with Shadow lying across their feet like a living blanket. Isaac settled onto the rocking chair beside them, the blanket across his knees, coffee now long cold, but still cradled in his hand. Amanda pulled out the same worn photograph she'd brought to the police station. She showed it to Emily, two figures beneath a tree, arms around each other, the world still whole. "I carried this with me everywhere," she said softly, "even when I couldn't remember where you were. It was the only thing that made sense." Emily took it gently and tucked it back into her tote. "It's okay, Mommy. We're together now." The snow began to melt in slow drips from the porch roof, plinking into the soft pile below. In the stillness, the town of Willow Run carried on somewhere out of view, but on that porch, beneath that quiet sky, something long lost had returned. Not just a child to her mother, but something deeper, a sense that, even in the coldest places, love would bark loud enough to be heard. Sometimes God's miracles come softly. A child rescued, a dog that barked, a stranger who listened. Emily's story reminds us, love never gives up, and faith finds a way. If you believe in quiet miracles, comment, "Amen." Share this story, and subscribe for more true moments of grace. May God bless you and those still waiting to be found.